Hi, Dr. Zori. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
You are welcome. Thank you so much for having me on, Mory.
You're welcome. Okay, so let's begin with because you talk about shame a lot and how to
Mhm.
help people come out of shame, how to heal your shame. And I feel like shame doesn't deserve the attention that it gets because it does really hold a lot of people back from becoming
Mhm.
their great self. You know, you see people want something so much in life, but they're too ashamed to
Mhm.
go for it. People are in like dangerous situations, but they're too afraid to come out. It really like just
Mhm.
holds people down. And for something that is that negatively powerful, we don't talk about it a lot. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today.
Thank you. I'm excited to have it too. And you're right. Shame, I feel like, is an ultimate sabotager. It's sabotager of relationships. It's sabotager of how we show up in the world. So yeah, I completely agree.
Okay. So what is complex shame?
So complex shame is a term that actually I came up with. And the reason why I did is because as I was trying to apply Brene Brown's kind of her healing for shame, right, which is vulnerability and receiving empathy. What I found was that for certain people, including myself, that didn't work. And what Brene Brown proved was that it did certainly work so well for some people that for some people who have what I now call simple shame or adaptive shame is what the literature calls it, you have a sense of shame. And shame is something that says basically, I'm bad, right? It's more than guilt, it's more than embarrassment. But when you expose it, when you are vulnerable and you receive empathy from other people, simple shame evaporates. But what I found was that with a certain type of shame, which is also different from toxic shame, which is um, a very, very deep seated type of shame that's very, very difficult to alleviate. But there are people who have something that I call complex shame. And that is often developed by sometimes some trauma in childhood. Often marginalized communities I find have complex shame. It gets very much entwined with our identity and internalized. And what happens is that when we try to be vulnerable, either number one, we don't receive empathy from society or other people, we're gaslighted instead, and it makes our shame go deeper. Or when someone does give us empathy, there is a part of us, because we've entwined it so much with our identity, that says, but you don't understand. No, I cannot accept the empathy you're giving me because you don't understand what I did or how bad I am. And that's what complex shame is. And it takes more than just exposing yourself and receiving empathy from other people to heal.
Hmm. And how does this type of shame play out in your relationship, like a romantic or a platonic relationship?
Yeah, well, all shame makes us hide. So when we feel badly about ourselves, see, the thing about guilt is when you feel guilty about something you've done, right? And so when you're in your mind, you think, which truthfully, if I do something, if I fix this, if I apologize, if I change my behavior, I can assuage my guilt. But what happens with shame is that shame says, I am bad. And if you are fundamentally bad, there's nothing you can do but run, right? Or hide, really. You run from yourself, but you hide. And so the problem with shame is that not only does it make us feel terrible about ourselves, which then creates ripple effects about how we show up in the world, but it
Mm-hmm.
also makes us hide. And when we hide in relationships, we are not being our true vulnerable self. When we hide in relationships, when other people love us or express love to us, we don't feel loved. Instead, what we feel is they don't know me. And so they don't really know me to love me, right? And so we're constantly trying to seek validation and love from people, but when they give it to us, we can't accept it because we've also hidden from them at the same time.
Okay, so you know what I've come to realize is that there's a group of people who are even too ashamed to even voice their problems in the first place. Like
Right, that's what I'm
people.
talking about.
Okay, so does that fall under complex shame?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Ah.
Yeah. You're not even going to talk about it. Sometimes you're not fully aware of it because you've created such a facade over the years of hiding. But you would definitely not talk about it because you don't believe there is anything that can make you feel better about it. And you feel so deeply bad about yourself. You don't want anybody to know.
Okay, so now I feel like there's a borderline. Like, so what then is the difference between shame and embarrassment or like
Mhm.
guilt?
Yeah. So guilt is just a feeling that I've done something wrong. Guilt is a behavior and it's not attached to identity. It's not I'm a bad person necessarily. It's I've done something that doesn't align with my moral character, my values, right? And we all do things. We all do things that don't align with what we feel is okay. And when we do that, we feel guilt. But what we can do is we can change our behavior. So that's guilt. Embarrassment is a social kind of emotion, and it's temporary. And it's almost like it's like a surface shame, but it once again is not attached to our identity. It's this feeling that's both a physiological feeling and an emotional feeling that says, ooh, I have somehow done something that misaligns with society's ideas about what's okay. Or in some ways, I've shown more of myself to someone than I wanted to, right? I blundered, I made a mistake, and everybody saw. And so embarrassment is vulnerability attached with maybe a little bit of shame, but it's temporary.
Hmm.
Shame is not temporary generally, right? And complex shame attaches itself to our identity and then it becomes I am wrong and I internalize that. And so in relationships, we can become codependent. In relationships, we can be in a place where we are constantly seeking this validation, but at the same time hiding ourselves.
Wow. So at what point in a person's life do they start to accumulate this shame in a way wherein like it follows you unconsciously into your adulthood and your relationships?
Yeah, so shame often, well, first of all, children as early as 2 years old can experience shame. And shame is what I call a social emotion that we put on people. And in society, we've used it because it's very effective in changing outward behavior. So the reason why that's important is because a lot of times, especially in religious societies, people use shame to try to change people. And what they think they're doing is changing people's behavior. But what they're actually doing is making people hide their behavior so that on the outside it looks better, right? What was your question? I forgot what your original question.
Yeah, I was saying, at what point in your life do you start to accumulate this shame in a way where it follows you into your adulthood or your relationship unconsciously?
Right. So, shame for everybody, we can feel shame as early as 2 years old. But what happens is those toxic shame messages that can sometimes happen in families, they tend to be something that we hold on to. So we might have shaming experiences, we might have traumatic experiences in our early development and family of origin. And often what happens is that we think that when we leave a person who may be abusive or unhealthy or toxic, or when we just leave an environment that hasn't been so good for us, we imagine that we've left that behind. But that's not really what usually happens. What happens is we leave the place or we leave the people and we pack up all their words and we take them with us. And when we take their words with us, we then begin to enact them on ourselves, right? And that's what keeps the shame spiral going. That's what keeps it. Basically, we manage the shame ourselves by continuing to say the words. And often we don't realize that we're still using words that were said to us that we thought we had left behind.
That is so, so true. Wow. Okay, so
Yeah.
now before we move to the next question, you were saying something about how people typically like the example of religion, for example,
Mm-hmm.
how they try to use shame to try and change a person's behavior. But what I've come to realize is that typically when a person comes and tries to shame you for how you are living your life, I feel like a part of them is triggered by it, so it doesn't necessarily genuinely come from a place where it's like they care. It's like you're reminding them of something that maybe is in them that they're too scared to do or they're too ashamed to do, and then there's you doing it so boldly, so fiercely, and they just try and use the shame tool to just try and put you back in your place. And then if you are not really grounded, you just think, oh, you're doing something bad.
Right.
But in the other sense of it, you're just really triggering this person. And that's what
Mm-hmm.
I feel like more people need to understand. Do you agree with that, or am I
Oh,
just
100%. Yeah, one of the things that we do with shame is we hide our shame and we also project our shame. And we can do both. And the most toxic, when we go over to toxic shame, then with toxic shame, people are often projecting their shame constantly, because they cannot hold it inside. They might not even recognize it. And the problem, especially, and I am a Christian, and so I'm not trying to put down religions, or Christianity even, but often the problem, especially within religious cultures, is that people aren't even aware of how deep their own shame goes. And they're not aware of it, and they project it onto other people. It happened to them and they project it on you, imagining that that's what we do. That's how we fix control behavior. But the
Mm.
research has shown the opposite. The research has shown that when you shame people, you do not actually eliminate behavior. All you do is make it go underground.
I feel like in some cases you don't even make it go underground. Now, like people are now beginning to rebel. Like you shame
Yes.
them, then they do worse things. Okay, like you want to get angry, I'll give you something to be angry about, and I absolutely
Sometimes.
love people like
Hmm.
that. But
Hmm.
I'm sure that it must take a lot of courage to just like
Right.
show up in a society that's constantly trying to like shove you and then tell you to
Hmm.
shut up. But you
Hmm.
still come out and then you do what you think is true, what you believe to be true to yourself. But then you were saying you know how shame can shape your childhood,
Yes.
but then leaving the environment does not necessarily mean leaving the shame behind,
Correct.
because I feel like a person's first thought is like, oh my God, I'm free. But all of these things have been kind of like embedded in you,
Yes.
which sometimes can be a very heavy burden to carry, especially when you don't even know that you're carrying it. You just see that you're acting a certain way. So I want to ask, how do you then begin to just lay all of this burden that wasn't even yours in the first place? How do you begin to just free yourself of it?
That's so beautiful that you said a burden that wasn't even yours to begin with. And that's right. For most of us, that's the case with shame. In my book, Stronger in the Difficult Places, I've laid out 8 steps to untangle complex shame, essentially from your identity. And I would love to give your listeners too a PDF that also, it's kind of like a little ebook that lays out the steps of overcoming complex shame. But I will tell you simply a couple
I'll
of,
put the
of
link down below.
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
great. Um, the thing about complex shame is the first thing we have to do is become aware of it. And so, for a listener out there who's thinking, I wonder if I'm dealing with something like that, these would be some of the indications. Um, if you tend to have relationships that are very codependent, meaning that it's hard for you to separate your emotion from your partner's emotion, right? Whereas you're always striving to kind of be loved and to make your partner happy. You have difficulties doing things that feel like something that might upset your partner. You can't allow your partner to hold their own feelings, um, without them being, attached to yours. If you find you do a lot of people pleasing, if you find that in many of your relationships you're hiding, you don't want somebody to know something about you, you tend to not be able to share your feelings, your thoughts authentically, it's probably because of shame. If you feel in your workplace a lot of imposter syndrome, like, I don't really deserve to be where I am, I'm not as good as these other people, all of those are indications that you may be dealing with shame. And so the first step is figuring out, oh, yes, I am dealing with some shame. And then it's important to start figuring out, where did that shame come from? Can you think back to some initial shaming incidents in your life? Can you think back to words that were said to you, or experiences that you had in society where you got the sense that you are not good enough, that you yourself are inherently unworthy? And so it's really about learning to pay attention to that, learning to understand where it came from. And then the hardest part is doing something for, and I say you're doing it for your brain, because here's how our brain works. When we have shame, we believe that we are no good, unworthy, right? And we also believe that everything is our fault. Most things are our fault. And the problem is that when you go to therapy or you try to be vulnerable and people tell you it's not your fault, there's that part of you that says, no, 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 you don't understand. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is to go ahead and acknowledge for your brain. Look at the things that you think are your fault. Look at the ways that you think you may have contributed to even horrible things like abuse or assault or things like that. Because there's always a part of your brain that's going to say, no, you contributed. You went to there or didn't, protect yourself or made this choice. And so let's go ahead and unfold that and acknowledge that and forgive yourself for all the things you didn't even do, and then all the things, the ways that you hurt yourself running from your shame, because we do that too. When we're running from our shame, we hurt ourselves. And then our shame gets wrapped up with those things that we did to hurt ourselves, and it just feels like one gelled blob against us. And so, what I'm asking you to do is untangle it. Go ahead and look at it. Forgive yourself for those things. And when you can forgive yourself, it's a hard step. Then you are able to start to walk a little bit freer. But then the next step is going ahead and being vulnerable and talking about your shame to someone, whether it's a therapist or a clergy person or a very close friend who you can trust to hold your shame, right? Learn to speak up about it and continue a process of forgiving. And then there's a whole maintenance part as well. But it's steps.
Can we quickly like talk about the 8 steps, just like bits, just like little bits? I know you just mentioned the first step, be aware of it, So what's the second one?
Right. So the first step is to be aware. The second step is to understand. So you kind of need to go back in your history because there's also multi-generational processes of where did this shame come from, right? So understanding your mother, your father, their generational shame and how it may have been passed back to you. The third is you want to start to line out all of the words that you're saying to yourself. So you want to create a dialogue, and it's a journal. It's like a journaling thing because you want to track yourself over a week or 2 weeks. What are the things that I say to myself when I'm angry, frustrated, sad, confused, right? What are those words? And we want to create affirmations that counteract those words. The next step is really writing down your shame story. And so you need to, I think it's helpful to write down some of those initial shame stories, journal them once again so that you understand them more. The fifth is starting to understand your phantom critic and your courageous truth teller. So your
What's phantom
phantom
credit?
critic,
Okay, yeah.
yes, so your phantom critic is it's that part of you that attaches and identifies with the shame. The phantom critic develops to protect you. So it's going to criticize you. It's going to tell you all the bad things and all the fearful things that could happen if you speak up, because on one level it's trying to protect you, but in trying to protect you it holds you down. Now the phantom critic also in your childhood might have protected you, because in our childhood we learn who we have to be in order to survive our environment. And so the phantom critic feels like a friend. It feels like it's this warning friend that's telling you, better not do that. You better not show up as yourself. You better hide, right? You're not good enough to do that. It feels like a friend, but it's not. It's phantom because it comes from your past. It's like a ghost of your past, and it's critical, and it holds you down. So you need to really start to understand that phantom critic, and then you need to embody your courageous truth teller. So the courageous truth teller tells you the truth, not the lies of the phantom critic. It allows you to see yourself in totality. So yes, maybe I have some deficits here that I can work on, but these are my strengths, and these are the ways that I can show up in the world, and this is what's real about who I am, not what that phantom critic is telling me. And then we need to take the steps that I said of going ahead and taking that accountability, I think that's 7, for the things that you didn't even necessarily do, all the ways that you hurt yourself in the process, naming them and forgiving yourself for them. I forgive myself that I didn't fight that attacker. I forgive myself that I did fight that attacker and I got hurt worse. I forgive myself that I didn't stand up to my parents when they were emotionally abusing me. I forgive myself that I got in that relationship that wasn't healthy for me. I forgive myself for whatever. We need to really work on forgiving ourselves. And then we need to speak the thing. We need to learn to speak our shame, because when we speak our shame, it does help to alleviate it once we've already forgiven ourselves. And then we start a maintenance process. And the maintenance process is really about physiologically releasing shame on a regular basis, because shame is this thing that we will never get rid of as a society. And the goal is not to get rid of shame. The goal is for us to kind of be able to walk with shame in a healthy way, to be able to see it and go, oh, yeah, I know what that is. I see that. I know that's shame. I know how to work with it and deal with it so that it doesn't take over me or sabotage my life or really negatively influence me in any way.
This is so true. And I feel like a large part of people are dealing with this because I saw some parts of myself in this story as well. I remember, like, because I've always had like a strong sense of identity. And
Mm-hmm.
some people really like it, but for some people it really bothers them for some weird
Yes.
reason. And so I remember one time I was like maybe in my late teens or like my early 20s, and I'm going out, and so I don't wear earrings for some reason because I'm just like comfortable like that. If I want to wear it, I wear it. If I don't, and then I remember this family member says, "Oh no, you should wear earrings." I'm like, "No, I don't want to wear earrings." And then they go, "Oh, you think you're Beyonce?" And in a very
Right.
spiteful way, they weren't being funny about it,
No.
and I still carry it with me till this day.
Mm.
Like Beyonce is great, but I'm also great. That's
Yes.
my mentality. I don't feel like there's anybody who's better than me. I also don't feel like
Mhm.
I'm better than anybody. I just feel like we're all just like, if we really know our true potential, that everybody is truly great. But then she said that to me, and as in your teens, you don't really have the some most teens, I feel like you don't really have the mental capacity to really process what was going on because they were an
Right.
adult. They were supposed to be the kinder and the bigger person, but then they
Yeah.
would like just throw like jabs at and then they were a constant part of my life, so they were always there, and I always had to take up like this negativity. And so
That
I
was
was
a
thinking,
toxic shame message.
from their part or from my part?
That was from their part. That was a toxic shame message that they were sending to you. And it was wrapped in this kind of subtle kind of paper, if
Yeah,
we can call it that, because it's anybody could easily excuse that away, like, oh, that wasn't a criticism, but it was. It was a who do you think you are?
yeah.
You are not that good, right? You
Hmm.
think you're somebody. And that's a toxic shame message.
And I've now found that they say that because they wouldn't go out without earrings because they don't feel comfortable. But then I
Exactly.
shouldn't have to do that. And a lot of those things have happened. If obviously I can't keep naming examples, but they've sort of like, I've been doing work to let go. So I wrote a
Mhm.
book and I would get like compliments about how great the book is, and I'm like, are these guys lying to me? But then it's
Yeah.
not one person who's saying the book is nice. It's
Right.
not two. It's not three. It's not like people. But then on the
Hmm.
other hand, I'm like, oh my God, I want this book to do well. But then I'm getting like compliments about how it's a great book, and I can't accept it because I think
Hmm.
that they're like lying or they're just trying to be nice to me.
Yes.
Or like when
And
somebody
that's
says, oh,
complex shame.
ah,
Yes.
ah.
When you can't take that in because you can't believe them for your own reasons about how you truly feel about yourself. So you're thinking, no, what they're saying can't be true. They must be lying because they don't really know, right? They don't really know how bad it is, or they're just making it up. Whatever reason that you make up for yourself, it's hard for you to accept that.
Which is weird because even when I was editing the book, even I
Mhm.
was like learning things from me. I'm like, oh my God, did I
Yeah.
write this?
Yes,
So I'm
I
like,
love
yeah.
that.
But then I still cannot believe that people who are saying the book is actually nice. I still feel like, oh, they're just trying to be nice people. Maybe they don't really mean that the book is nice, and it messes with
Mhm.
my head. But because I'm aware to a good extent, I'm doing like work to just be
Yes.
acceptance, be like
Hmm.
just accept it. Just obviously I
Right.
say thank you,
Yeah.
and leave it at that. But deep down, I'm like, wait, my book changed your life.
Mm.
you know, like,
Yes.
okay, yeah. But it's a lot, and it's a lot of work.
Hmm.
If I'm going to be honest, and that's why what you do is
Yeah.
so important.
It is a lot of work.
Don't stop
It's
doing it.
work well worth it because it's life work, right? It can change your life. It can change your perspective. It can change your lens. It can change your experience in all relationships. So it is hard work and it's well worth it.
Yeah. Anyways, moving on. Moving on. I feel like I just dumped some of my traumas on you. I feel like I just dumped some of my traumas on you. But yeah,
Not
so
a
what?
lot.
Yeah, so why do so many people like stay in unhealthy relationships or like push good love away? And how is
Mm.
shame at the root of that?
Mm. People stay in unhealthy relationships for a lot of reasons. Some of it, are religious based, and a belief that once they make a decision, they can't unmake the decision and they have to stay regardless of, you know, anything. People stay in unhealthy relationships because they don't believe that they deserve better. People stay in unhealthy relationships because that is a pattern of what they've seen in their life, and they confuse even emotional abuse with love, right? There's so many reasons why people stay. People stay for children's. People stay for lots of reasons that they've kind of rationalized within themselves. And a lot of it is fear based, a lot of it is shame based. There was another question that you asked, though. I don't remember what it is. Why do people stay in relationships and what? What was the other thing?
No, no, that was just it. Like, why do people stay in like relation and push love away? You
Oh,
know,
yes.
they can't
Yes.
accept love.
Right. So people push love away because they don't feel that they're worthy of love. People push love away because they haven't had the experience sometimes of being deeply loved. And the thing is I always say people confuse familiarity with attraction. So what I mean by that is when we've experienced something that feels familiar, it makes us think, oh, I like that, especially in relationships. And sometimes it's very subtle and we're not even aware that that's happening. But it's not that you're attracted to it, it's just that it's familiar. Familiar can feel like home, but if home was toxic and home was dysfunctional and home was unhealthy, then you're going to confuse somebody who's toxic, unhealthy with attraction because it's familiar, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so that happens, but that's the flip side of what you were asking, how is shame a part of staying
Mm-hmm. Why
and
do you
unhealthy?
stay? Yeah, and why do you
Yeah,
push love
yeah.
away?
Right, push love away. So we become attracted sometimes to things that are familiar because we think that's attractive when it's really just unhealthy but unfamiliar. And then we push love away because sometimes we've never experienced it. And when we come up against things and society and relationships that are alien to us, that don't feel normal, our nervous system ramps up and we will push it away even if it's healthy. If healthy is not normal for us, we're going to push it away. And the thing is that in our childhood, when we naturally as humans seek healthy love, right? That all babies, all children seek healthy love. But when they don't receive it, they learn to put up barriers. They learn to survive without it in some ways, right? And so then when it comes to them in another form, when it comes to them from someone else, their natural response is to push away. It's too scary. It's too intimate. It's not something that feels okay, natural. And so what we do is sometimes we demonize it. We call it neediness. We call it weakness. We create these terms for it and apply that, project our shame onto other people who may be just trying to love us in a healthy way. So it takes a lot of deep work to recognize, is this something healthy that I'm pushing away because it doesn't feel normal, it feels alien and unnatural to me? Or is this something that isn't good for me? And it's hard to know when you haven't experienced it. And so it's a conundrum and it takes time. It is doable though. So the thing that I want to really express to people listening is that sometimes when we talk about trauma and we talk about shame and we talk about how it works and all the things, it can make us feel defeated, right? Like I am broken, I'm beyond repair, I'm no good. And my answer to you is no, 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 no. We are actually opening up a light for you. We're shining light on something. And there is so much hope because if you can pay attention to this and if you can be intentional about understanding yourself and untangling it, there is so much hope. So I hope that as we talk about shame, instead of feeling bad about yourself, you actually feel hope that this can be untangled from yourself.
Because it can.
It can, absolutely, it can.
Yeah. Okay. So is vulnerability always a good thing?
So I think authenticity is always a good thing. And there's a
Okay.
difference between vulnerability and authenticity. Vulnerability is not always a good thing, especially when people can hurt us, right? And so there's a number of caveats with vulnerability. The first thing I say, especially to writers, I'm a writer, is that when we talk, when we write, we need to write from a place of healing, not from a place of bleeding or pain. So, and that's public writing. So I think that all writers should be writing when they're bleeding, but that's your private writing. That's for your journaling. That's for your therapist. That's for your inner circle, right? Writing in words and speaking in public needs to be from a place of healing. Now, you can be very vulnerable when you're coming from a place of healing. We can share very vulnerable things about ourselves, but we should never do it when we are still in the process of bleeding, hurting, haven't healed in that way, if that makes sense. So I think vulnerability is very important and it has its place, but we must be vulnerable from a place of safety, whether it's internal safety or external safety. But I think we should always be authentic. And authenticity is just essentially not being fake, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you, I can sit here in my authenticity and tell you about shame, and I can even tell you about some of my own experiences. And that's being authentic. But I'm not necessarily going to tell you all of my deep dark secrets, right? I'm not going to open up in a way that may be harmful to me. That would be vulnerability. Although I can tell you I have them, I can tell you I've experienced complex shame, I can tell you my whole story. But that's different than being vulnerable in an unhealthy way.
Mm-hmm. I remember there used to be a time where I would like mask my vulnerability with like jokes. And
Hmm.
I had like this group of friends and they were like, "Oh, you never tell us anything." I'm like, "Oh, but I told you this." And then they go, "But you were laughing." I'm like, "That's how I cope."
Yes.
But it was serious and it did hurt.
Mm.
And then they were like, "Yeah, but you looked like you were joking about it." I'm like, "Yeah, but did I tell you or did I not tell you?" Because
Yeah.
when I would say these things, I would like laugh about it, or
Yep.
I would just try and
Hmm.
make light of it because I didn't just want to maybe seem
Yes.
like I was like weak or like
A lot of
even though like
people.
I'm like very emotional and I cry all the time. I
Yeah.
cry when I'm hungry. I cry when I can't find my phone. You know. I'm like I don't want to be doing that in front of you, but I would. But then when
Mhm.
I'm telling you, I'm laughing about it. You
Right.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just people deal with these things in different ways, and I find that as a result of that, you don't
Hmm.
get the empathy that you sort of need,
Yes, you're
you know?
right.
And so that just makes you close your doors even more
Yes.
and just
Yes.
makes you hold back even more. And then you always look put together. You are the friend who nobody worries about because you look like you have your shit together. Excuse my French, But what are some of the and again, I say all of this because I'm sort of aware, I know. But
Hmm.
what are some of the subtle behaviors that can indicate that a person might be operating from a place of shame, even though they seem to be put together?
Right. Well, I mean, you just said it. And what you explained, what you described was hiding. You're hiding in plain sight, right? You're hiding by making jokes about something. You're hiding by not letting them know that you're really hurting in your vulnerability. But what happens when you do that is then you get hurt when you watch them support somebody else who's really going through something, right? And you're like, I was going through that and nobody cared it because they see you all put together and so they imagine, oh, she's got it. So Elaine Fluker actually, I don't know if she termed the coin, but she talks about I've got it syndrome. And that I've got it syndrome is that facade that I'm good, I don't need help, I'm okay. And when we do that, we are hiding, and we can hide behind a beautiful face, we can hide behind perfect clothes, perfect everything. But what's really happening inside is that we're hurting, and we have so much shame we don't want people to see. But then we get hurt that they don't see it and that they don't help us. But they can't when you won't be vulnerable enough for them to know what's happening. So often when you see somebody, and I'm not going to say that everybody who's fully put together all the time is experiencing some level of shame. Shame shows up in lots of different places, but perfectionism is about shame, 100%. And
Well,
so, when we look at the perfectionists and the super type A personalities, underneath that is this sense of shame. I have to be perfect because I myself am not good enough, right? And if I don't put that out in front of everybody, then they're going to know and see that I'm not worthy.
so is hyper independence rooted in shame? You don't need anybody, you want to do it on your own, you don't receive help, you're just like a macho or like a superman or like a superwoman. You don't want anybody to
It
do anything.
can be. Hyper independence can be rooted in trauma, which then becomes a defense mechanism because when I needed somebody or when I relied on somebody, they hurt me. And so instead, I'm going to be hyper independent. I'm not going to need anybody because needing someone means I'm vulnerable and I could be hurt. So sometimes it can be as simple as that, as I'm avoiding pain. And then other times it can be about shame. It can be about I don't really feel worthy, and so I've got to build myself up and make myself look better. I've got to pretend like I don't need anybody so that I feel better about myself because I'm doing it all. So it could be both, but most of the time the problem, I mean, it's so interwoven because almost everyone who experiences trauma also has shame because trauma creates shame. And so if hyperindependence can be a trauma response, then the answer would be yes, there's always shame involved.
Hmm. So I know you're a mom of five.
Mhm. I am.
Yeah, I'm a mom too, and my one of my greatest like fear and also my greatest mission is to
Mhm.
ensure that I raise trauma-free children to the best of my ability, so that no child has to go to therapy because of how I raised them. And I'm doing this knowing that I have like stuff of my own to unpack and to get rid of or to work on. And so I want to ask now, how do I make sure that I don't unknowingly pass shame down to my children? Like, how do I break this cycle so that it ends in me? And I would never do it, but telling my child, you think you're Beyonce,
Yeah.
because it's easy to just casually say, and like I say, I know I was aware, and is why I know that it's wrong, but somebody who isn't will just probably go and tell your child, you think you're Beyonce, because they don't want to wear the leggings that you put out for them to wear to school,
Right.
so how do I stop? How does anybody who's watching this
How
stop
do you
break
stop
this
the
cycle so
cycle?
that they don't pass it down to
Yeah.
their children?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I believe that I know actually that it starts in relationship. And here's the reason why. Actually, our goal as parents is not to not create holes in our children because that's going to happen. You cannot get through life without having emotional holes. The goal of parenting is to not create gaping emotional holes in our children. So I think about the goal of parenting as creating a healthy net. So if we think about what a good net does, is a good net is full of holes, right? But the holes are small enough so that it catches the things it needs to catch. The holes are small enough so that it's functional. A net with a gaping hole is not functional, right? And so, what we have to do, because often when we are trying so hard, you said to make sure my children don't experience trauma, right? When we're trying so hard, what we do is we swing the pendulum. So, if our parents were super, super, super strict or abusive, we will often swing the pendulum all the way over here to extreme, you know, lax to sometimes even neglect in ways because we're trying so hard not to have our child experience this and they just experience a different type of trauma. It's just opposite. We
Mm.
and sometimes generationally we swing these pendulums when what we really need to do is come to the middle, right? And what we need to understand that our goal as parents is to of course love our children in the best way we can, but help walk them through the difficult things that they experience instead of trying to get them to avoid them. We walk them through the difficult things. The best thing we can do as parents is also to do our own therapy because an anxious mom is generally, unfortunately, often, I hate to say it, but going to create anxious children. Even if she is super anxious about trying not to create anxious children, the only way an anxious mom is probably not going to create anxious children is if she's working on her own anxiety instead of working so hard on her parenting because her parenting will still come across anxiously, right? And so the answer is you work on yourself. You continue to work on yourself. And the second answer is relationship. In a healthy relationship with our children, there's so much room for repair. And healthy relationship with our children, if we say something like, "Oh, you think you're Beyonce?"
Mm-hmm.
and we realize it and we go back to our child, imagine if whoever said that to you went back to you and said, "You know what? I said that and that was a terrible thing to say. I realized that that was probably my own shame or my own insecurities, and I placed that on you. I want you to know that is not about you. That's about me.
They would
And
never do
you are
that.
beautiful." Exactly. So imagine if they had done that. You would have had a reparative experience and you wouldn't still have that critical mind. Not only that, but you would have had beautiful modeling and you would have recognized, oh, people can do things and recognize it and they can fix it. And what she said was not about me, that was about her. it would have created a totally different experience. And so my answer is, don't focus so hard on avoiding that. Focus on fixing yourself, healing yourself, and focus on such a healthy relationship with your child where you can go back and have these conversations, where you can repair and you can let them know who you are and what your intention is.
Okay, that's comforting because I do that. Every time I find that I make a mistake or I've
Yep.
made a mistake, I always have like conversations with my daughter because my son is a little bit too little to have these
Yeah.
conversations, and she's always open and she gets it and she asks questions
Hmm.
and she says, "Okay, I forgive you." I don't know if she knows what it means because she's only 4, but she's like, "It's okay, I forgive
Oh.
you." Yeah, but I always try and make sure that I overstep every time I feel like I've crossed the line. Um, okay, so in a case now where, because I feel like it's not everybody who's going to be able to afford therapy up front,
Mhm, mhm.
is it possible to heal shame on your own, or do you necessarily need the help of a therapist or a coach?
You don't need the help of a therapist or a coach. Is it helpful? Is it, beneficial, easier? 100%. That's why I wrote my book called Stronger in the Difficult Places. It really, if you are super intentional and you take all of the steps, you can, on your own, heal shame. You absolutely can.
Yeah.
Heal simple shame and complex shame. Toxic shame is a little different. It's usually very much linked to personality disorders. It's a totally different thing. That
Did,
would,
you, did we talk about complexions? I think you just mentioned it, but we didn't really say what it was. Can we
you
just
mean
talk
toxic
briefly?
shame?
Yeah,
Toxic shame?
toxic, yeah.
Yeah. So toxic shame is the most severe type of shame. It comes from toxic messages. It usually comes from very early, um, really significant repeated childhood abuse. And it becomes externalized, meaning that people with toxic shame aren't fully aware that they have it. And so they're constantly projecting it often onto other people. And they can be kind of very unhealthy and toxic to be around. And it does require some therapy and some treatment. The problem with toxic shame is that most people who really are walking around with toxic shame are generally unaware of it. I think a lot of the things that we've historically called toxic shame is actually complex shame. If you have awareness of it, you're probably not experiencing toxic shame.
So what typically is the behavior of somebody who has toxic shame? What do they do? Like, how are they like? If you had a friend that had toxic shame, what kind of things would they be
So
doing?
if we think about something like narcissistic personality disorder, right? There's this facade of this ego, which is really deep, deep. It's rooted in this very deep, deep shame. Um, People who tend to be very narcissistic, they're not often very aware of their shame. On the surface level, they think I'm wonderful, right? It's everybody else, um, and so it's kind of an example like that. But they will project their shame onto other people.
Okay. They're never wrong. They don't take corrections. It's just,
I don't like to use the word never because toxic shame can show up in very different ways. Sometimes it can just show up in someone who's extremely, extremely, extremely chronically depressed and non-functional, or it can show up in a narcissistic personality disorder. It can show up in a borderline type personality disorder. So it's not never, um, but it's very, very deeply ingrained, and it's very hard to kind of untangle. And like I said, people with toxic shame tend to project their shame outward.
so have you ever had to deal with any type of shame personally? Was that why you started doing this?
Yes, I have my own personal shame story,
Mm-hmm.
and what I finally understood was that what I was experiencing was complex shame. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't simple shame. I don't believe it was toxic shame,
Mm-hmm.
in the most severe form. But yes, I have my own personal shame story rooted
Mm-hmm.
in my childhood. We're
Mm-hmm.
growing up in a fundamental Christian home, and we moved when I was 8 years old to an all-white farming community after living in Washington, D.C. I got pregnant when I was 15 years old. Was sent away, placed my child for adoption, came back home to pretend like nothing happened.
No.
Um, yes, and so I had a lot of shame embedded in my adolescence and young childhood, and went on to have my children. And I had a daughter who was my first kept daughter, who was born with a very severe genetic disorder, and I had this belief that God was punishing me for placing my first daughter for adoption. So I dealt with some significant shame that I had to learn to walk myself through.
Wow. And what was your first step to getting healing? What did you do?
The very first thing that I did was what I've talked about, is starting to learn about my shame messages and that they weren't true, and learning to untangle those messages from what I really deeply knew about myself but wasn't able to access, if that makes sense. I had to start showing myself some compassion. I had to forgive myself for all the choices that I made, um, whether, and why, and understand why I made them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I had to learn to speak about my shame instead of hiding, both in my relationships and publicly. And I had to forgive myself and really work towards that maintenance of untangling and recognizing, who am I separate from my shame. And then there's, a spiritual component as well, this understanding that God, is this punisher. Um, and often when we grow up in religious communities, we have this sense of this condemnation, right? And so I had to learn also that, you know, being hurt by people in the church wasn't God hurting me, and that also some of the messages that I learned about who God was were actually fundamentally wrong. So I had to untangle those as well.
And this is why I always tell people to try and know God for themselves. I'm Muslim, and I grew
Mm-hmm.
up in a very religious, not very religious, but I grew up religious, and I feel like my folks were quite liberal. But I don't know that every Muslim household is as liberal as, my parent. And I had to also unlearn that God does not punish. It's not always about heaven
Mm-hmm.
or hell. You're here for a reason, and he's just like, I feel like he's like too big to punish you because, for example, you got pregnant at 15. It's insulting to him
Mm-hmm.
to 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 think that he would do that, you know. But that is what, like, people have just tried to make us believe, and we just carry that burden, and we make mistakes that humans are sometimes supposed to make, but we go around thinking that we're like the worst people ever. And
Right.
it's just so unfair. And it's even more annoying because it doesn't matter what I say, it's not going to stop. I've even been tainted the bad person because I'm saying this is not how it is. And they say,
Mm-hmm.
oh no, you don't even look Muslim. You're not even the proper Muslim. You shouldn't even be talking. But I
Mm-hmm.
know God and I practice. And I'm telling you, you're not supposed to suffer.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't want you to suffer, and I cannot imagine what you must have gone through, to be very honest. But do you have a relationship with your kept daughter?
I do. Yes. Well, you mean with the daughter that I
Yeah,
placed?
the first daughter, yeah.
Yes, I
Did
do.
you
We
you went
reunited
back
when
for
she
her?
was 18. Pardon me?
You went back for her?
She found me when she was 18. Yeah, yeah, she
Oh
did.
my God,
And we reconnected. Yeah. So we have a relationship.
that is so beautiful, and
It
and
is.
I'm happy that you guys were able to, like, pick up. But if you could do anything differently at 15, what would you have done
You
after
know,
after obviously finding out that you were pregnant?
right. It's hard because part of having to forgive myself is recognizing that I made the very best decision I could at the time.
Okay.
With my adult wisdom, I would know that I could stand up to my parents and make a different decision. And there might have been options out there for keeping my child, and that maybe I wouldn't lose my parents' love, or that I could withstand the shame of coming back home with a daughter, right? From an adult perspective, there are plenty of things that I would do differently, but at 15, I didn't have the capacity to do any of that. I was just trying to survive my environment and do the best I could to still be loved and still survive the environment that I was in. And so that is why I made that decision. Um, and I am able to recognize that it, to some extent, is a decision I made to preserve, my relationship with my family. I don't like to say that I didn't have a choice, because there are choices. We could destroy, we could kind of blow up our family and do things, but when we're in cultures and there are things that are put upon us that we are understood to do, unless we have better, more wisdom, we don't see any other option but to do what is expected of us, if that makes sense. So, yeah, from adult decision, I could make different decisions, but I also understand that as a 15-year-old girl, I couldn't.
And decisions like that sometimes are difficult when you have to choose between the family that you've always known,
Hmm.
because that's your life, that's your mom, and that's your
Yep.
dad. And healing is understanding that you can't even be so mad at your parents because they didn't even know better. They are
Right.
probably even traumatized themselves.
Yes.
Like if they knew
Absolutely.
better, they would do better. That's
Yes.
probably what they saw growing up, and so that's their truth, and that's what they know, and they're not
100%.
necessarily bad people. So you can't be
No.
mad at them, and you have to forgive yourself, and it's so
Yep.
much work. It's so much work. It's like I want to be angry at somebody, and I want to be angry at something, but you cannot
Yeah.
truly heal and move on. It's comforting to say this is who is the bad person. It's not
Right.
my fault. It's not, nothing is my fault, but you can't even say that. And
No. And
it's
we
like
swing that pendulum
exhausting.
too between blaming everybody and deciding that, you know, it's all my fault. And the reality is it's once again, it's in the middle. It's in the middle. And what you just said is so wise and healthy because it's easy to just get angry. And I've seen birth mothers get angry at society, at, their parents, at everybody who condemned them, at all, and the reality is that everybody did those things and everybody had that stance. And my parents sent me away for reasons that they thought were best. It
Mm-hmm.
was unfortunately an act of love that was also very damaging to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the reality of life. And so I love that you said that because I hold no anger towards my parents. I understand that they were in a very difficult predicament themselves and they did what they felt was best. Yeah, that's
This has
beautiful.
been a conversation. Dr. Zoe. I'm thinking, is there anything that I should have asked you? I don't want to leave anything out that I should have asked you that we haven't spoken about today.
Um, I can't think of anything.
No,
Yeah,
so we've covered it all.
it was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much. This is a lovely conversation. I'm sure this is one of those where I will go back and watch and watch and watch.
Mm,
Because you're so authentic and you're so good at what you do. And you were saying these things, and I'm like, oh my God, I get it. I resonate. I
mm-hmm.
resonate. You're doing such good work. Thank
Oh,
you
thank
for,
you.
and I'm so grateful for people like you because, like I said, shame is it holds people back from reaching
It does.
their true potential.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's ever going to go away. I feel like at one point in your life, you're going to have to choose between shame and going for what you want. And
Mm-hmm.
it's so
Absolutely.
very familiar. It looks like your comfort zone. It looks like, oh my God, something that it's just the easier option, shame.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
It is.
fighting it is harder.
Yes,
And a
it
lot of
is.
people don't know. And that's the work that you do. And that's what you talk about. And I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
that you helped so many people. And I know that so many people are going to watch this and be
Mm-hmm.
blessed, like how
Yeah.
I've been blessed. And thank you so, so much, Dr. Zoe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for having a voice.
Thank you. Yes. Whew, what a conversation. That's going to be all for today, guys. Until next time, it's bye bye.
Bye.